Hey, modern math teacher, Kristen here. And let me start by asking you guys a question today. Have you ever planned a lesson that just felt so right? Like, so good. Everything about it was working for you. The tasks and activities you chose, they were like super solid. The math, it was rich, it was rigorous. Your students, they were actually in there talking, trying things, getting stuck, debating, going back and forth, really just engaged with it. And in that moment, you just had that thought like, yes, this is it. This is the lesson. This is what teaching's all about. Maybe you even thought this is what productive struggle is supposed to look like. But then, maybe that later that afternoon or, the next day, you had a quiet doubt. Did any of that actually stick with my students? Do they actually know what they were supposed to be learning? Maybe that was just fun and fluffy and not the kick-ass math class that I thought it was. Did the struggle turn into understanding or just effort? Like what actually happened there? And if you have ever had that experience, I want you to know that you are definitely not alone and that moment of uncertainty doesn't mean that your lesson failed. It means you right now are reflecting and asking the right questions. And that's what I find myself doing on my national board journey is every time I teach a lesson going back and thinking what went well, what could I have changed? Really just thinking about what's happening and how are my students learning? Because you guys, when you're teaching and when you're trying to get your students to engage and struggle productively, that's powerful, right? But it's not the finish line. You guys, struggle, that productive struggle that we've spent all 2026 talking about, it's the middle, it's the meat, but it's not just the goal, okay? So over the past few weeks, like month and a half, we have spent so much time talking about deep diving into the productive struggle. We talked about how to plan for it, how to launch tasks that invite that thinking, and how to resist rescuing students' thinking too quickly. And all of that really does matter. But there's one piece that we don't necessarily say out loud. The struggle by itself does not guarantee learning. I know. Struggle, you guys, though, it's the experience for our students, right? Learning is what the students take with them after that struggle. Okay. And so the bridge between these two is really where your effective math teaching strategies are really living. Okay. So when we don't plan intentionally for what comes after the struggle, a couple of things can happen to us. One, our students can just like walk out of the classroom unsure what actually mattered that day. They know what they did. They maybe had a good time, maybe they didn't, but they're really not sure what their big takeaway was. They remember the activity, right? But not the math involved. So, it was great. It was a memorable moment, but they don't actually remember any of the math that you're trying to uncover for them. Or they felt like they worked really, really hard, but they didn't get anywhere. They didn't grow, nothing changed for them, okay? And that is not because that the struggle was a bad choice. It's because the learning wasn't fully consolidated, okay? So, there are a couple of instructional teaching strategies that must follow your moments of struggle, okay? So, let's talk about what needs to happen with your students after you let them struggle, because this is where the good lessons really turn into those great ones, okay? Strategy number one, reflection. We talked about this as part of the practices, but you really need to make sure that you're helping your students make meaning of the experience, okay? Reflection is the first and most often skipped step. I know when I'm crunched on time, it can be hard to try to get in a moment of reflection, right? But after a challenging task, students need that like space to think about and answer questions like, what did I try? What worked? What didn't work? And maybe why didn't that work? And what would I do differently next time? Because our goal is to turn them into these persistent problem solvers, right? We want them to think about how they use their strategies in class, which strategies were most effective, which ones maybe didn't work out for them, what they're going to do the next time they enter a moment of productive struggle. Okay. This isn't really a moment about grading or correctness or anything like that. It's about making sense of the experience that they just went through. And here's a really important part, you guys. Reflection does not have to be long or fancy to be powerful, okay? Really simple questions can work. And here are some simple examples of teaching strategies that work inside the classroom. A single one question exit ticket. One question. We can all do that. You can have them do it on a scrap piece of paper. You don't even have to have anything planned, okay? A quick, I used to think, now I think. Great opportunity for your students to sit back and reflect like, what did I think about this going into it? And now what do I think? Okay. And you can always, of course, add sentence starters for your students. At first, I thought this, but now I realize something else. Or the strategy that helped me most today was, and getting them to think about that, because when they think about it, it cements it for them and they're more likely to come back to those strategies in the future. Okay. Your reflection piece helps your students move from doing the math to really understanding that math. And without it, the struggle can sometimes just feel frustrating instead of productive. Okay. So, first, we need to make space, as even if it's a small space, for that reflection. Okay. Step two, structure, strategy two, whatever you want to call it. We want to talk about feedback, not fixing for our students. We want to keep the thinking with our students. And this is the part that challenges a lot of us as math teachers because we care and we want our students to succeed and we want them to get the quote unquote right answer. But we often see exactly where their thinking went off the rails. Like we know it. We're like, oh, I know exactly what you did wrong. But guys, I got to warn you, there's a big difference between feedback, which like nudges their thinking, and fixing, which just removes it. Okay. So fixing sounds like, oh, hey, actually, you could do it this way. Or, you know what, you should have done this instead. Or let me show you a way to do that. Okay. That's you fixing and changing their thinking, and their thinking is now gone. It's replaced by your thinking. And that's not what we want. Feedback sounds like, tell me why you chose that strategy. What were your steps and thinking when you were trying to solve the problem this way? Where did this start to feel confusing? Right? And I like to point that out with like, oh, I see what you were doing here, and then here your moves don't seem to make sense. Can you tell me what was happening in this moment? Okay? Or what happens if you try a different approach here? And sometimes I'll highlight other approaches that I've seen in the classroom. If you're at whiteboards, you can tell them, to look at other people's whiteboards and say, like, which strategy or which approach might be more beneficial for you to try. Okay. So just remember that we want to give them feedback that nudges them in the right direction and keeps them thinking instead of pulling the thinking away from them and trying to fix it for them. Okay. Strong teaching strategies in mathematics protect our student ownership even after the task is done. Okay. When we jump straight into fixing, which some of us have a habit to do, I get it. I've been there before too, right? But when we do that, we accidentally undo the struggle that we worked so hard to protect and design in class. Okay. So we want to give them feedback, not fix it for them. All right. And strategy number three, we want to formalize the math and really help that learning stick. I'm all about keeping things sticky here. If you've ever heard me talk about anchor activities to make the learning stick, formalizing the math is what's going to help the learning stick each and every time. Okay. So this is the final step where everything is coming together and it's often rushed or it's skipped entirely. And that's because we weren't trained how to do it. Okay. Just pure, simple facts. We weren't trained how to do it. When we went to teacher school, we were not trained to teach with inquiry-based and thinking and all of these strategies, even though they have been best practices forever. And these are based on strategies from books that I read 15 years ago when I started my teaching. We, some reason, were not really taught how to do a really solid, good consolidation at the end. And this is what matters so most. So much. You know what I'm saying here. Okay, guys? All right. Formalizing the math at the end means we are now naming the strategies that the students used. We are connecting those different approaches and we're making the underlying math explicit. We're calling out the actual math that was happening. Okay. But this is this is how it can usually happen through your whole class discussion, right? You're talking, you're sharing the ideas. As your students are sharing them out, right? We can start naming these things. We can refer back to your student share out, back to their own words. And then you, as the expert teacher, formalize it with a name, with a process, with whatever it is that you need. Okay. So whole class discussions, fantastic. Strategy comparisons, especially if you have used a task that lends itself to like all 5 math practices, right? Where you're selecting and you're sequencing, you can go through all the different representations or the different strategies and compare and contrast those so that students can start thinking, oh, this strategy works really effectively in this way, and I can see how this one might be beneficial here. Okay. And then, of course, synthesizing what your students notice. We want to bring it all back together, again, using their language and then mathematizing it, formalizing it for them. Okay. But we need to make sure that we keep all of this in balance. We don't want to formalize too early because that will short circuit the struggle, right? So don't just like synthesize in the middle. Don't do that. And if we don't formalize at all, right, the learning stays fragile. They're not sure what they did. They can't name it. They can't explain it. They're just kind of in this like weird dissonant state. Okay. So formalizing the math after student struggle helps your students answer, what was I actually learning here? Oh, that activity that taught me about exponential growth and decay. Cool. Now I know a word to describe what's happening. Okay. How does this connect to what I already know? Try to make it connect back to something. We know math builds on itself. That's why we're always saying, like, you have to do well in the classes before us because you're going to need it again. And what you're going to do with us, you're going to need the next time you go to math. So connect it, be intentional, make those connections explicit for your students. Okay. And then help them think, like, when might they use this again? Maybe it's a strategy they might use again. Maybe it's the actual like math term that they might use again, right? This is where that like durable and enduring understanding is going to come from. Okay. All right, guys. Now, as we move forward, I want to think big picture here, zoom out across the productive struggle mini series that we did. Here's like the big full picture, right? We're planning for struggle, we're launching tasks with intention, we're monitoring without rescuing, we are reflecting, we are giving feedback, and we are formalizing learning, right? That final phase is where that struggle turns into growth. And if you've tried even one idea from that mini series we just did, that matters. Small shifts compound over time. Compound exponentials. If you don't know about it, go learn about it. Algebra 2, friends. All right. So we are about to head into March, and I'm super excited. I've got some more podcast guests coming on to share some of their expertise. We're going to start talking about support and AI, and I'm really excited. So, support for planning better questions, anticipating misconceptions, designing reflection and feedback without burnout. We are talking tools, we're talking systems, strategies that help teachers do this work sustainably, right? Without losing what makes good teaching good. And before I move forward with you guys on this, let's leave you with another small, doable action step for you to try this week. Okay. We don't need to add a new task. Nope. Instead, I want you to just add one intentional reflection moment this week after a task or a lesson or an activity or whatever that you already plan to use. Okay. One reflection piece. Ask them something like, what was hardest today? Why? What mistake helped you learn the most? What strategy would you try next time? Okay. That one question can completely change how your students experience the struggle. All right, you guys, productive struggle is not about making learning harder. It's about making your learning stick. And what we do after the struggle is where that really happens. Until next time, you guys, keep the students thinking, keep the tasks engaging, and as always, keep it real.